a slight hush is descending, which is telling me it's time to get going. I think we'll say B+ for getting back at 10:55. It's just after 11, so we're doing okay. Hope you enjoyed coffee and networking and networked furiously. I know I did, and hopefully fully refreshed and ready for what is actually going to be another absolutely brilliant session. We've got 3 fantastic speakers. We're going to slightly alter the running order. One of our speakers is rushing to get here, so we'll slightly mess things around, but everyone knows that that's going to happen. So I'm going to, without any more messing around, ask Dame Sue Bailey to come and speak to us, and we're really honoured to have you here. So the doofer will do things for you.
Doofus there. I'm glad you have doofus. Okay. Morning everybody, and welcome, and thank you for being part of this. If Lisa had spoken first and I'd have come second, it might have seemed that I was trying to curry favour with my boss at HEE by saying good things about her. So I'm going to say it in her absence, in that Lisa has a huge remit at Health Education England, but she has taken a particular interest in mental health, which is very informed, and I just want to publicly say that because I don't think it's often said. But I'm here, as you're in the dark, I can't see you. But if you work with grown-ups, would you put your hand up? Okay, so quite a few, I have to assume, are either working with the bookends of elderly or children. So I'm not going to attempt to present all the PowerPoints I've got. They're there if they're of any use to you. So I'm privileged to be chair of the Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition. And I'm going to talk about a whole systems approach, which is one of the key planks of Future in Mind, which was the government task force and initiative about how we're going to improve child mental health. And I know it's already cropped up in the discussion earlier this morning. So I have to say what we do. We work with over 140 organisations to campaign and influence policy with and on behalf of children and young people in relation to their mental health and well-being. And we're hosted by the Mental Health Foundation. We're grateful to to people who support us financially. We're not a big organisation, and we're very prudent in how we spend our money. And I'm going to say what we do. I'm going to quickly look at prevalence, and I know that already came up this morning. Pressures impact, future in mind, whole systems, schools approaches, and what we need to do moving forward. So there we are. We're a very colourful group of people, but the key thing to bear in mind is that we are large organisations, small organisations. We come right across the professional groups, the voluntary sector, user carers, the whole panoply. So we've got together, so we spend less time arguing about who ought to be doing what, but we had to decide what needs doing and get on with it. We collate views, including young people, and we're solution and evidence-based and values-based, because if the government want things to be value for money, they'd be better to make them values-based in the first place, because that will be the thing that will deliver the gap between demand, supply, and what we can achieve in sustainability, which is why prevention is so important. So our priorities are a whole system approach in prevention, and I've learnt today by reading a strange government document that when things go out to people across the system in the NHS, that performance management is always at the top of the list. And one of the key things they see in performance management is prevention. But of course we lack money being given to prevention because it's difficult to prove an improvement that you've brought in because you're stopping something happen. And I know that that's close to Public Health England's heart. So we're looking at the role of educational settings, and we've developed the work. So at the moment we have in our head how we could have a synergy about how we could support any educational setting, and that starts in day nurseries, goes through to schools, goes to colleges and to universities, and hands the baton on in a way that a child would have a good experience of having their mental health and well-being supported. We may all do it different in those settings, but it has to make sense to somebody who's 3 who may need help early on, right through to somebody who's struggling at university. And we all know the recent launch of the UK universities because of the concern about the rising suicide rates in students. We're also very interested in variation and inequalities, but particularly about, we talk about mental health, mental illness, neurodevelopmental disorders and learning disability. So this is what you all know. We're going to have new data next year. It would be amazing if the data hasn't shown an increase in the prevalence rates. I know you discussed some data this morning from the NCB study, and you do have to be careful about cohort studies, so I'd just put that in as a health warning. What I want to point out in the next one, looking at aware of time, is to say 36% of children with a learning disability have mental health problems. We don't even know how to assess that in children with profound learning disability, and there'll be some work coming out shortly that we're doing for Comic Relief on that. 71% of children with autism have a mental health problem. I didn't bring my autism spectacles, but I just want to put a message out from Jack, who is about helping people to aspire who have autism. And what he says on a cost-benefit analysis, if we would help Jack when he was 3, so we continue to be a round peg in a square hole because that's what he wants to be and he has that right to be, he would not have ended up with the mental health problems he did. So, and my spectacles are red and they have a square lens and a round lens, but I've forgotten because I'm getting old. Brain injury, again, is a forgotten part of this system. We know about the pressure of the money, and I know that you've discussed how the money isn't getting through, and I'm very grateful to the following speaker that he asked for this money to be ring-fenced. And in an upside-down way, if any of you come from Wales, the Minister has sort of ring-fenced it without using that name, and that's allowed us to progress with services in Wales. We know that children are very ill. We know they get lost in transition. We know that we fit into the agenda around what we could do to help reduce the obesity. We know that local governments are under pressure, but I think their chapter in this book that's in your pack is fantastic on children and young people, so thank you. Children and young people are perfectly capable from the age of 3 of saying what they want. They want easier access, they want to take control, they want to self-guide and regulate their own help, and they're very apt and online, and they know they can embrace the new technology, so we shouldn't be afraid of social media. They want teachers to know about mental health, and God love them, they want teachers not to be depressed. So it may not feel that if you're a teacher, but that's what the study I did a few years ago showed. But better transition, listening to, but not just listening to, acting and reducing stigma. Future in Mind is a blueprint. I think it's a good blueprint. It talked about the right things. And we've got the green paper coming this autumn, where please, will you lobby the 2 ministers and say you want to be for services for 0 to 25? I deeply believe the civil servants want that, but whether the ministers want that, I'm unsure, so please lobby. Whole systems approach is how an organisation or agency has some connection with children, work together, covers the spectrum, from prevention, specialist mental health services based on local need. So for the health profession, we have to completely consider that health is place-based health, and hospitals are places who take children on loan when it's absolutely needed that they need to be in hospital, but they should be in the community getting wraparound care. But we need to coordinate and use the framework. So shared understanding, we did a values-based approach, which we produced, Claire Tyler chaired the commission. You can read about what was important: equal partnership, empowerment, workforce, whole system, leadership, and what Yalom told us many years ago, that what children need is us to be present and faithful, and that's the most difficult thing to be when services are disconnected and when children can sometimes show their displeasure in quite an in-your-face way. So we need to work smarter with a public health approach. We need to utilise the wider workforce. Mental health and sport in schools is what we're working on, and give children the skills and assets they need to be the good parents of 2035, working productively, contributing to local communities and helping the economy post what will still be a post-Brexit era. So there's lots of work going on in education, but the key thing is that we need a leadership in this. Schools and head teachers know best what should happen in their schools, so it's not a business of us telling them what to do, and we need to listen to teachers and not just tell them. I'm looking for red lights and things, but I'm not yet seeing them. So the 3 key principles we worked with all our 140 organisations may look disgustingly simple, but landing simple things is notoriously difficult. A better balance between attainment and well-being, and I believe Ofsted are listening to that. better training and support for staff on mental health, both in teacher training but actually on an ongoing basis, and better support for children and young people who need it in a way that they'll find acceptable to them. That will deliver better mental health and well-being. And there's our key principles. Leadership and management is at the centre. It's for schools to decide how they want to do that, but those are the key components which you can look up, and it's part of the work we did for PHE a little while ago. But enabling the student voice, so I'm privileged at the moment to be chairing a commission in North East schools, 300 schools. It terrifies me. The other commissioners are all head teachers except 4 of us, so I worry about my skirt being too short and I'm going to get told off. But they're brilliant. They want to know what values-based is. They want to know what the evidence base is. So if somebody comes up the drive and says, we've got the cure to all your mental health problems in school, they can interrogate it. We're teaching them how to look at what they actually want, how to measure outcomes, and how to reflect and see whether they've met that. I think I'm probably now out of time. So that's that. So I just really want to say thank you for listening. There's so much more to do in this field, and I've now moved to the position where there's no such thing as the art of the impossible. It's a will and determination and supporting the workforce to be healthy themselves, that together we can improve services for all children, irrespective of their position in life. And I think we just need to get on with it and get some money ring-fenced. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sue. And some really important themes there, some of which pick up some of the threads from earlier, and some of which really take it in another direction. And again, reminding us, as Gregor did, of the importance of schools and the places that children and young people are, and making sure we provide support and legitimate, helpful support in those places. It's a nice link to Phil, because Phil did cause some interesting waves when saying that he thought that money for children's mental health should be protected, should be ring-fenced, that there should be some requirement, and it really does go where it's intended. And I think all of us who feel strongly about that were absolutely delighted to hear him say it. But actually you're here to come and talk to us about something different today. So from NHS Clinical Commissioners, and indeed your role at Kingston CCG, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Hi everyone. I'm going to resist getting on to what the previous speaker was talking about, save to say that yesterday I spent an hour with one of our local headmasters who is very concerned about the level of anxiety in the pupils in his school, but equally concerned about the level of anxiety in the parents, which seems to be causing it. And I think there's a huge piece of work for us to do, not only with children, but also with parents, to try and make this an improved situation. What I've got to talk about today is something that I'm no expert in, but I've been asked to come as a GP and a commissioner to talk to you about unlocking secure care. So I've talked to some colleagues and used the experience that I've got around this area to try and have a look at it. Personally, something that really impacted me a year or two ago was I heard somebody with lived experience of being in a locked unit for some considerable period of time just make a statement that I thought, in retrospect, was obvious, but I'd never thought about. What he said was, there is no one that you will find in a secure unit who hasn't had something devastating happen in their family. And I think that really took me up short. And I thought there, if no other reason, is a good reason to treat each person as an individual. So, we're looking at unlocking secure care. And I've got to ask the question, it's going to be a tough pathway to climb, but actually, are we also trying to balance on a cliff edge with this particular process? And I just want to look at that for a few minutes and hopefully give some thoughts and some ideas about what might make the situation better in the future. The story starts, well, it doesn't start, but it has a starting point in 2009 with the Bradley Report, which was really a comprehensive report to look at reducing offending and to improve the public health of those who had offended, and to end this revolving door where people tend to go in and out of custody when they're actually mentally ill or they have a learning disability. And the report made something like 80 recommendations, and the consensus from talking to people is nothing much happened. I'm not saying nothing happened, but not as much as generally people felt was needed. So I started to ask myself, what and who is secure care for? Is it for the person, or is it for society, or is it for both? And the answer is it's probably for both. However, it happens in a variety of settings. So it happens in medium secure, low secure, PICUs and locked rehab. And from talking to people, they say that often there is a lack of a clear definition about which should be used and when, and therefore there's a lack of clarity around how we commission those, because the commissioners equally don't have that degree of clarity that allows these facilities to be used effectively. And then PICUs have changed as well. If you talk to people who work in them, their view is that 10 years ago, it was much more about intensity of care and therapy, whereas now the focus has tended to shift to security. Is that people's experience here and know about it? Anybody disagree with that? Generally, that seems to be the view that is coming across. And that in itself is an issue, because what we're doing is using PICUs to contain rather than to treat. So what is commissioned? We all know about the hot potato of Section 136, and in London there's a lot of work going on around this, as there is in other areas, to make sure they're handled better. And actually Section 136 should not be overused but used judiciously. I don't want to get sidetracked onto that, but it's one area. Another area is Section 117s, and there's really recently been, I think it was the BBC did a Freedom of Information piece looking at the use of Section 117s and saying that there seems to be less money being spent on these when people come out of the units. And part of that is the disintegration of social care with mental health. Many local authorities are withdrawing their social workers from the integrated teams and running separately, and generally the personal experience of patients is that they're getting less than they used to. So, who's it for? Is it for the system so that we make sure that people are all right, or are we really trying to remember that it's that individual who's had some horrendous things happen in the background that we need to be helping and trying to rehabilitate? I know that's oversimplifying it, but I think it's an important question that we ask. Is it an overgrown path? There may be a pathway. How much trodden is it? One or two comments about this. It would seem that there are huge transfer times, particularly for prisoners, to end up in medium or low secure or PICU, and that can be from a month to very, very many months. PICU's average is around 20 to 30 days, but for the other units it's a lot longer. And it's reported that individuals can have 5, 6 or 7 assessments in that process. If you've had one assessment, that's one assessment too many, I find. It's really soul-destroying when you go through the same process over and over again. And the message is that we need to better connect acute general services and PICUs to the criminal justice system, because at the moment there's a disconnect that allows this pathway to get overgrown because it's so difficult to traverse that people don't get through it. And this is not a criticism of individuals, this is just recognizing where the system is at. That in turn leads to some difficulties with commissioning. We've already spoke about the lack of definition for these various units. And if there's a lack of definition, there's a difficulty in how they're used. And one of the messages that I've had back is if you take what each individual unit thinks they're for and what they do, and you overlay them, there isn't a lot of difference. And then when you add to that where the funding comes from, and often the urgency of needing a bed 3 days ago. Do you recognise that? Often the default is a PICU. So is it any surprise that the use of PICUs has changed? Because that's the easy default position, because the transfer times are less, and also they tend to find it easier to get their beds freed up. Not necessarily the best use of the resources that we've got. Third thing, the pathways out of secure and semi-secure accommodation are not clear. Now, this isn't actually distinct from the problem that we've got with acute general beds, because getting people into accommodation is really difficult when they come out of a mental health unit. Often they've lost the place they had before because the benefits have changed, and now the benefits don't allow them to afford somewhere, and a lot of them are faced with being homeless. Now, when you add to that all the complications of the forensic side, getting people out into the community to have community support they really do need some accommodation. They could do to be helped to get back into employment, but those things aren't always there. So what's happening is the beds are getting a bit clogged up because people aren't moving through them as well as they should. Final point I want to make is that the services in the community aren't being developed. Now, that's partly because not too many people are coming out to use them, but equally, the way that people are managed tends to be uniprofessional in secure units. That's very distinct from a lot of areas in mental health. And I think one of the messages I've been getting from people who work in this is you really do need a multidisciplinary case management system, particularly when they're moving out into the community, because many of the problems they're facing, the difficulties are around social, cultural, and non-medical issues. So we perhaps need to consider putting much more value on non-doctors and non-nurses getting together to manage people who've been in a locked unit through the pathway that progresses them into the community, because otherwise we end up with a medical model which does not work when you get back into the community where the medical side is actually the least important. And these seem to be some of the issues that are coming up with secure care. So who holds the keys and who carries the can? Because one of the things that makes this a cliff edge is people are anxious about what will happen if things go wrong. Does it go wrong often? No. But when it goes wrong, it can often be pretty devastating. We all know about homicides and other things that have been committed by people who've left secure care. But the issue is that's not frequent. But when it happens, boy, do you feel on the rack. So we've got NOMS and the Ministry of Justice who make decisions about detention. We've got mental health tribunals who make many pathway decisions. And often they go with the decision of the clinician, the judgment of the clinician. But if it goes wrong, the message I'm getting is they're no longer around. It's left to the clinician. So what does that do to the clinician's opinion and the judgment that they need to make if they know they're going to carry the can? It tends to make them fairly risk averse. So what do we need? We need multidisciplinary teams across the pathway that share the decision making and the responsibility, so it doesn't land on one person's shoulders that makes them feel that they're on a cliff edge, that if the least bit goes wrong, they're going to be tumbling off, and actually there's not going to be anybody at the bottom to catch them. That needs a lot more attention to having a timely approach to the movement of people through this pathway so that it's done effectively. And multidisciplinary teams seem to be a key thing that is not as much in prominence as it should be in this whole system. And then the final question is, who cares? Does anybody really care about these people? There's a lot of a societal view that, oh, lock them up and lose the key, they're a problem in society. But actually, let me come back to that one person who spoke. There's usually good cause for some of the things they're doing. Maybe not an excuse, but there is explanation that we need to take account of and endeavour to help with. So why is it all falling between, or perhaps I should say failing between many groups? Well, commissioning is fractured, isn't it? I've just listed 4 up there. NHS England, criminal justice system, CCGs, local authorities. There's probably others there that we could add. How are we making sure that this is a coherent commissioning system that takes people from maybe prison or from the society through secure units and back into the community again in a secure way, in a safe way, but equally in a way that doesn't get interrupted and facilitates them getting back to some normality? The message is from prisons that prisoners often have to wait until the shit hits the fan before any action's taken. They're only referred to mental health services at the point of crisis. Now, when things are in crisis, when do things need to be done? Yesterday. So where do you find a bed? Wherever you can. Does that make for good decision making? No, as we've already seen, we need to look at that. People say there's a lack of secure beds. Yes, there's a lack of availability of secure beds. My question is that because they aren't there, or because we're not freeing them by making the path back into the community as appropriate and easy as it should be? And we've already talked about risk aversion because responsibility tends to sit with individuals. So just a few things that might make a difference. Shared decision making by multidisciplinary teams across a pathway with shared responsibility is important. Better use of courts diversion and liaison services. For example, Section 137 at the moment have to go to a secure unit, but the question is raised, why can't some of them go to a general acute ward if they're appropriate? Early access and referral to mental health input for those in prisons, with better links to general acute services and community services. At the moment, prison transfer insists on going to a secure unit. Is that always necessary? It's kind of one of those things that was better done with a proper assessment. Improved community support, we've already talked about, with accommodation, employment. We need to look at the new models of care where providers are getting together to take the budget for commissioning, but they need to link their Tier 4 budgets with what the area is doing in terms of community and all the other things, because if we don't join up those pathways, it won't work any better. And finally, STPs, sustainability and transformation partnerships, can no longer ignore Tier 4 services, but need to grasp that nettle of joining the pathways up across the footprint so that they are effective and allow people to get the most appropriate care. And you'll be relieved to know I've finished. Thank you for listening.
Very much, Phil, and a really important reminder of a group of people who do get forgotten, and I think particularly this notion of locked rehabilitation. We published a briefing paper on that just before the summer that you may have seen, and if you haven't, do take a look, because it's a hidden part of the system that's in no guidance anywhere. And yet it's becoming quite prevalent. So certainly something to think about on the edges of the secure system. Without further ado, really pleased that Lisa, you've joined us. We've been on panel together for the last 2 days, so this is nice. This is now what we do. And it's really good to hear from Health Education England. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Many thanks, Andy, and good morning, everybody. And sincere apologies for not being on the time slot that I was due to be on. I've had delayed meetings and then trouble with taxis as well. And in addition to that, actually, I've got a blister on the bottom of my foot, which is really, really painful. And it just reminds me of a story, this blister, because I've never had one before. But I don't know if people know, but we're creating a new nursing role called the Nursing Associate. And they're really fantastic individuals, and part of their training is about working between physical and mental health to get the parity of esteem from day one. And I was speaking to this one trainee nursing associate that was used to working in acute care and now is taking on this training role, and she was in a mental health placement, and she couldn't understand why this person with mental health depression, the way she explained it, wasn't responding or wasn't engaging. But actually she asked him if he wanted a bath, and he had normally said no, but the skills that she gained along the way meant that I think she was able to coerce him into having a bath. And so off they went to the bathroom, and when they got undressed and got into the bath, she found this huge blister on the bottom of his foot. And none of the other staff had noticed it because they'd not been able to get this person in a bath. So I thought it was a real good example of that parity of esteem, but how blooming painful it must have been, and nobody treating it. And from there on, he was able to get treatment, and obviously it got better. And apparently he was feeling, a lot better for that. So it just goes to show the difference that people can make with small interventions, but actually how painful a blister really is when you're trying to get about. So I'm going to talk to you about what we're up to at Health Education England on the mental health agenda. And it was a great day yesterday when we had the Confederation launch of the mental health workforce strategy. And I stood up then and said, I'm not from a mental health background, but I really wish I was, because I'm so enjoying being amongst the mental health community and learning about all of the opportunities that can happen. And I think you're just a fantastic group of people that are really passionate to try and make a difference in really different circumstances to what I'm familiar with. But what's so exciting about the policy directive that we're faced with is, as a result of the 5-year forward view, You know, we have got, believe it or believe it not, £1 billion worth of investment for 1 million extra contacts to make a difference to people with mental health. And that has to be just the most fantastic news, I think, for the mental health community. And whilst we could argue, is it enough? How will it happen? I really think we have to start talking it up and thinking how great it is that the spotlight, the system through the 5-year forward view has really said, no, we need to do more in mental health. So the ambitions are definitely ambitious. So we're going to see 70,000 more children and they'll have access to evidence-based mental health care interventions. We'll have at least 30,000 more women each year having access to evidence-based specialist perinatal mental health care. And the story goes on, and I won't talk about them because I'm sure you know well. But in terms of really saying we need to work differently and do different things with our local populations, here it is. And as a result, we need a workforce that's going to be ready to deliver those services to these people, and we need the system to be organised to do that. So in response to this, health, that just talks more there again about reaching the million, you know, 21,000 more children and young people accessing treatment, 35,000 more children and young people accessing more treatment, and the story goes on. But to do that, we need a workforce plan and a workforce that's able to respond to these needs. So we published we published a document called Stepping Forwards at the beginning of August, just a month or so ago. And I think for the first time ever, we've started to identify what the workforce challenges are, where the gaps are, and what we need to do to make it better. And what was really brave about this document, and I'm not sure how many of you have seen it, but obviously I would urge you to do that, is that it didn't try and say everything's fine and it'll all be okay. It really identified the real challenges that we have. So, you know, the vacancy rates within our NHS mental health services are really significant, around 17,000. We have the worst retention rates within some of our mental health settings of all of the services that we deliver across mental health. We don't have well organised career pathways. And again, I think the image of working in mental health and having a career in mental health needs a lot of attention. So it was quite brave to say there's lots to do. And by the way, this is a 5-year plan. We've got to get there by 2021. The meeting I was at this morning was about this plan. What do we need to do and how can we make it work? And the only way we're going to make it work is through collective action. No one part of the system holds all of the answers, as we would know, and nobody can be singly responsible. But in order to do this, we need to work together. And I'm really delighted to say that in terms of tangible progress, you know, we do have at STP level senior leaders taking responsibility for mental health. We have performance and delivery boards that are looking at how the money's flowing and what the outcomes are doing as it stands. And we have ministerial interest as well. So in terms of this actually getting traction, I think it's fair to say it's absolutely got that. But what we need to do now is to gather up all the fantastic innovations and excellent ways of working and make sure that we spread them at pace and scale. So just to kind of reiterate the points that I've said, whilst we've got to do that between now and 2021, it does feel like there needs to be a longer term integrated health and social care workforce strategy. So is the number of consultants right? And my friend Sue Bailey will know more about this than I, but you know, in 2030, what will the workforce look like that cares for people with mental health issues? How much of it will be delivered through technology? Because we've got to deliver this transformation within the next 3 to 4 years, actually what new roles and solutions will we come up with that says actually this is what we need in the future? And I think that's really exciting. So we know more of the same isn't an option, and I think the work that was done by the Mental Health Confederation, you know, particularly around how do you engage people for a career in mental health? Where do you start? Do you start with school children? Is it teenagers? Is it university? And I think the recommendation to really engage schools is fantastic, and we look forward to taking that forward. But it's not just about the health system, as people in this room will know. In addition, we've got the housing. You know, I've just caught the end of the last presentation about the justice system, working across education. We really have to have a combined approach in order to make these differences stick. So this is very much the start of the process, and we've produced a high-level roadmap which identifies what the challenges are, what would we do if we were to turn on all the workforce solutions, how quick can we get there, and most importantly, how do we do this together? So I'll just show you this roadmap because this was a bit of a moment for us in Health Education England. I don't know how many people know much about Health Education England, but sometimes working in it, whilst I love every minute, we're often criticised. Where are those nurses? Where are the doctors? Why haven't we got X workforce? Well, most of you will know that, you know, how many years does it trains about 3 years to get a nurse, 15 to 20 years to get consultants, doctors through the system, maybe a bit shorter if they really go for it. But it's very difficult when we've only been around for sort of just under 5 years to have all this workforce ready because it takes a long time to get them. So what we identified was, well, what's the roadmap? What have we got now and what do we need to do in the future? So what we identified on the left-hand side of what you can see is what are the posts in the system and what is the demand that we have currently for a workforce to deliver the care. And you can see there that, you know, we've got a 17,000 gap, so we need to fill some of that. And what are the options then that we can take to do that? So we know that one of the biggest issues that we need to tackle, and NHSI are particularly leading on this, are the retention agenda. So how do we get people to stay in the service? And that means doing things quite differently to what we've done before. So if we were to retain 1% of the people that leave already, what impact would that have on a 17,000 vacancy rate? And I think the statistics are quite stark when you start to do that analysis. And then as you move along that roadmap, I think it gets probably more interesting because you can start to say, well, if actually I think about new roles or different ways of doing things, how can I actually make services more attractive? How can we get more dynamic skill sets in place? What new roles could be created that actually help us to make sure the prize at the end happens, which actually is having 1 million more patients being cared for. So work is currently going on at the regional level. This is an interactive tool being populated across the regions of England, the 4 regions, to say, well, what's our gap in Midlands and East? What's our gap in London? And then the exciting bit, once we've done that diagnostic, is say, okay then, so how are we going to fill it? Are we going to use international recruitment? Are we going to create new roles? Are we going to really focus on retention? Are we going to look at pathways working in different ways? So actually the opportunity to be real pioneers, I think, is certainly within the gift of the mental health community. And this just talks here, the analysis that's been undertaken cannot be underestimated, and I'm emphasising that point because we've never done this detail to say, okay, this is what we've got now, and they're the numbers in the blue, and actually here are the numbers in the gaps. And we know that if we just put in lots of more doctor posts, then we wouldn't fill that, because where would we get them from between now and 2021? So we've got to think really creatively and differently about how do we get the medical profession possibly returning to work, how do we keep them for longer, how do we get people from other countries to come and work with us, because we actually want to fill these gaps, and these gaps have been all part of the plan that has been funded and worked through. So if we achieve this, it will be absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure you know these areas, but just to say, and it's important that really it's a life course approach, but in terms of the focus of the 5-year forward view, it is very much about the perinatal mental health agenda, children and young people, improving health access to psychological therapies for mild and moderate depression, dealing with mental health when crisis occurs, liaison mental health, early intervention psychosis, which, you know, if I'd got more time, I'd love to talk to you about all of the work that HE has been leading on that, because I think we've made quite a significant inroad actually into training people in early intervention psychosis. So for me, as a non-mental health expert, if you like, I didn't really know what the term meant a few years ago. Now I kind of know all sorts of different things about it that really make a difference, and the access to liaison and diversion services. So, in a nutshell then, and take a bit of a breath here, and I'm the responsible officer for the workforce element of the plan, so I'm always quite anxious and have to hold on a bit when I read these out, but we are looking at a net growth of 19,000 people working across the system in mental health by 2021. Never been done before, which is just fantastic opportunity for us all. We are really focusing on how do we do workforce transformation, how do we upskill and develop highly skilled, flexible workers. So for all those debates and challenges about continuing professional development, pots of money or lifelong learning, you know, go out there and find it and get it. And we currently have funds available, £100 million of workforce transformation money that we should be tapping into to help upskill the existing workforce, because we don't want anyone to leave. We want people to stay and more to join. So it's not just about saying, oh, don't worry about the people we've got now. Actually, they're invaluable, but they probably need upskilling and retraining in places. We've got the exciting agenda around new roles, so the peer support worker agenda, the person wellbeing practitioners, call handling and nursing associates. These are really bucking the trend. They're really saying, actually, we are not going to be siloed from day one. We are not going to have a paternalistic approach to being told what to do by the nurse, the therapist or the doctor. We're going to co-produce our care packages together, and we're going to learn from real life experiences. And again, you know, one of the things that's really bowled me over with some of the nursing associate trainees is that they've been connected to people with long-term enduring mental health conditions as part of their education programme, and they are educating and contributing to the development of these trainees, and feedback so far is just absolutely amazing. We need multidisciplinary teams to deliver person-centred care, and again, this is where I think mental health leads the way, because it already works within a multidisciplinary team perspective. But actually, if you think about the education, the justice, the housing system, all of that needing to come together, what other kind of workforce does that? I haven't seen one. So again, it's something to talk up and shout about, because it is the way forward. And also, we need to make sure that, most importantly, we have staff training to deliver better services to marginalised groups. And I've been quite shocked, actually, around the stigma agenda and some of the statistics around the BMEs, mental health, access, treatment. You know, so this is a real opportunity, along with other stuff like the workforce race equality standards, to really start to tackle those enduring challenges that we know we face. And we at HE have also been thinking about nurse education. We've produced a nurse education reform document. The work was led by Lord Willis and the NMC, Jackie Smith and myself, called Raising the Bar. And that was about saying, for nursing, let's not silo you from day one. Let's get the parity of esteem. Everybody needs to know more about mental health, and in mental health you need to know more about physical health. So why have we got 4 branches of nursing? You know, how does that help us? When do you look after a child that's family or the individual might not need help with mental health issues? So we're really pushing those boundaries. We've also created older person nursing fellowships in support with King's College, and we're looking around the older people agenda with Professor Alistair Burns to come up with a competency framework for dealing with older people with mental health issues, which I'm really excited about. And I've talked about the trainee nursing associates already. So really then, if we come into a conclude, because I've got 1 minute left, so that's quite useful, that the things that we're learning to share and the work's underway, We need to build regional and local workforce plans. The conversations are happening now. The roadmap that I talked to you is interactive. That's been populated at the regional level. We want that to go deeper to STP footprints. We want providers to do them. So we really get great intelligence around what people need to do to actually turn on all the taps to make sure that we increase the workforce within mental health and that we keep the people that we've already got. Again, we've never done this before. We've never done it so openly and been so brave and bold about saying, here's the picture, come on, let's take collective action to get there. So building capacity in areas will be really important. Thinking outside of the box, exploiting all opportunities, such as the apprenticeship agenda, continuing professional development, different ways of working, pioneering is going to be absolutely vital. I've talked about the retention, but it's not just retention, it's about attractiveness and productivity. So, making sure we talk this up, not talk it down, which, to be honest, I've heard a bit of, and I think, no, don't say that. This is an amazing opportunity. Yes, it's challenging, but it is the right thing to do and will make a difference. And I think also it is really continuing the conversation about the mental health workforce. So it is, for me, one of the most diverse workforces, that the peer support workers, the informal workforce, the co-production that actually already occurs and that could go much further, I think is just really exciting and paves the way for others, to be quite honest with you. So that's really very, very exciting. And then just so you know, we've always got a plan. This is where we are on the plan. We're really at scale to get cracking to make sure that by January, every STP and the regions will really understand what they're going to do in order to meet this challenge and do the right thing for their patients and people in their communities that need mental health care and treatment. Thank you for listening.
So that's all pretty easy then. Three phenomenal challenges really around children's mental health, around secure care and around the workforce. And although they may seem disparate, there are some common themes again coming through that. Time for questions and comments. So if anyone wants to raise their hands, I've seen two. Do keep your questions brief if you can. And we've got one just there to start with, and then one just behind afterwards. And if you can say who you are and where you're from, that'd be lovely.
Jill Rasmussen, GPSI, Mental Health, Dementia, Learning Disability, and also I focus more on dementia. So within our Mental Health Programme Board, we had a discussion of the roadmap and the work resources that you showed there.
Fantastic, thank you.
And I had a question about whether the resources used to support mental health from primary care were accounted for in that roadmap, and gave two instances of physical health checks where people are referred back to primary care, and in a lot of cases to undertake that work, where we're seeing with older people mental health that the monitoring of treatments used in certain dementias is being referred back to primary care, so they're being discharged from secondary care. The people with dementia, when they've had a diagnosis, the Mental Health Trust talk about discharging back to primary care. And so primary care is, in a lot of cases, coordinating and supporting. Yeah. And if we look at the new draft guideline for depression, for instance, in primary care, it's talking about referral between IAP, secondary care, primary care, third sector services, mindfulness. And the coordination required for that is quite vast. And I think one of the things that is not clear is where the resource for that coordination is going to come from and who's going to do it. And to look at that roadmap, thinking about all the resources when we're looking at the new pathways, so not just within mental health, but what is also required across primary care. And I don't see the resource in that roadmap that is being used in primary care to support that. And I wonder if you and Phil would like to perhaps help me with how that is going to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm really delighted to hear that the roadmap's out there, so that is fantastic, and it will definitely pose these questions, because one of the things the roadmap does is it starts the conversation to like, well, what's missing and what needs to happen. So what we've been talking about is we have to stop working within organisational boundaries and silos and look across the footprint. So some acute services, for example, are saying, well, actually, I'll provide those mental health services out in the community, and I'll do an outreach service. Other services are saying, from a community perspective, if they're very strong, I'll provide an in-reach service. And I think we're still yet learning what models got to work. I agree with you, we can't possibly burden primary care with everything without putting the funding in there. And the other big challenge with this work is some of the money is around cash release in savings, because the whole point of this is to get upstream on prevention and, you know, help people to not get as poorly in the first place, which should be cheaper to do. Now, whether it is or not, I think we've got to go on that journey. But I think the fact that the STPs and the regions are going to be accountable for coming up with a plan that's doable, and these conversations are happening to say it's not either all in one place or the other is really important. And my advice to you is just to keep pushing and banging that drum to say, you know, it's not about transfer of responsibility or burden. It's about place-based commissioning and place-based workforce planning. And we've got to create a workforce that can work across community and acute, and not just work within an organisational boundary. And I've just been speaking this morning with Public Health England that are creating clinical pathways and passports to help the workforce move from one setting to another without having to start all over again in relation to their training. But I think more of these questions will occur when you get into the detail of the roadmap, because it begs those very questions.
Thanks. Phil, I think you wanted to have a quick word about this.
Very brief. I don't disagree with any of that. We need to use the mental health staff who are there. We need to put them in different context. We need to work them in a different way. We need to get away from thinking about pathways of care for patients. Patients aren't linear. What they are is they need a different set of services at different times, and it isn't one service at a time always. So we've got to get much better at surrounding the patient with those services at appropriate times. It's important that we in primary care use this opportunity to take some of the pressure off our secondary care colleagues. They don't need to look after the stable people. We can help with that, provided we've got instant access back to them, and it would help to free up their time. Final point, I don't think we're making enough use of trained peer workers who can do a lot of that navigation kind of work very effectively.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure there was a hand just behind. Yes, there is, yes. Just behind the pillar.
I'm Liza Dresner, Director of Resources for Autism, and as you can imagine, I'm going to talk about autism briefly. But actually, it's not just about autism. It's about, we watch our young people struggling with mental health as they grow, and the person they're with is often their mum. Often everybody actually today has talked about the community and people going back into the community. And what hasn't been said, and what I keep not hearing, is mental health support for parents, particularly for those parents who are poor, have English as a second language, don't know the system. And time and again, we see our young people going possibly into units, coming out again, being sent back to mum because the mental health issue's gone and they've still got the autism. All these sort of vague statements. And at the end of the line, there is a parent who may still be looking after a young person when they're 40 and whose own mental health is so fragile. And yet, if there was support for those parents very early on, a lot of things could be avoided, and better support in the community. When we talk about multidisciplinary work, is multidisciplinary that includes the parent.
Absolutely.
I think we're breaking out an agreement with this. I'm going to ask Sue to come in, but particularly on the how, because I think that's a really important point we're all going to agree with. How do we make progress on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the wraparound services to support the child through supporting the parent is absolutely critical. But then I think we have to see the parent as part of the system, and we need to give them more knowledge and training. And I have to say, when it comes to autism, I'm probably going to upset professionals. In many ways, the parents actually could wipe the floor with us about with the sort of things they've tried in terms of interventions. So we need to learn from their expertise, because each child with autism is different and individual, but there are commonalities. So I absolutely agree with you, and maybe we need to go back to using the term children, young people and families. We politically correctly we get wrapped on the knuckle if we do that, because we're not saying carers as well. But I think the concept of families, and by and large children live in families and families live in communities. So I think it's the way is to seeing parents as equals at the table. When I get so frustrated when things have got bad that the parents are almost brought in as the sort of wicked parents and told off or told they can't sit in the meeting. So if you want to go on the speech that Andy Burnham did at the International Public Health Festival, he's going to wrap it all round the child preschool, working with the parents, not calling them troubled families. So I think you need to look at that, because he is pledged that that's how Manchester's going to sort the world out, and I think that's brilliant.
I mean, I would just like to add that within Health Education England's Learning Disability Programme, we are focusing very much on autism, and we've created learning materials and tools for that. So I don't know if there's a way of getting those links out to people via this, but we have spent a lot of time and energy getting some good learning materials for people. That would be great if you could utilise that along the way too.
I'm sure as I don't work for them, I can volunteer GovConnect to do that. I'm just looking to see if any colleagues from them. Right, we've got more hands than we've got time to take questions. The gentleman in the middle there, I think, was first. So if you could ask a very brief question, if that's okay, and then we'll have our next break.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. I'm Justin Wilson, Medical Director in Surrey, previously in Berkshire. And before that, I used to work in secure settings, so some years ago. So I just want to pick up on the point about the multidisciplinary aspects, first of all. And clearly that's really important around making judgments around risk and responsibility. But ultimately, the legal role of the responsible clinician carries a lot of weight. And it was the connection between the service, as I work in the independent sector, and the local services that was really important to help make the decisions about moving people on. And in my experience, the involvement of local providers in effectively the delegated commissioning role to manage those pathways has been really important in effectively achieving that.
I don't disagree with that. The message I was getting back from some of the professionals is that if things go wrong, they feel a little bit hung out to dry and everybody else takes a step back. And I think it's really saying that, yes, their view has to be very important, but there has to be a corporate ownership of the decision and the responsibility going forwards. And I think that was the essence of what I was saying. But you're not going to get away from the fact you need to have that pathway through the various providers across the whole piece.
I mean, I'd just like to say with multidisciplinary teams, I think the bedrock of great ones are where you've got lots of trust and transparency, and actually that ought to be right at the beginning of the training when teams start to work together. And one of the rich things about mental health that I'm seeing is that they do train, work and learn together, and we do know where that happens. You get better, you get shared governance, and you get kind of better ownership of the challenges and the solutions. So we're big advocates of that approach to multidisciplinary training right from day one.
I think the final test of this will be, again, parents have not been mentioned enough, that I think things have gone quiet in government on personality disorder, and there was a bit of a tiff, I'm with Izzy Vidding on this, about emerging personality disorder and whether you can recognise it. And if across the up and down pathway of care for people into the forensic system, you could get this one right, everything else would follow.
There's some really important points about some groups of people who constantly and consistently are missing out. People with autism, people with personality disorder, a lot of gaps in the system that we have to acknowledge and deal with. Right, we've got what's rather euphemistically called a comfort break now. I think that means time to go to the loo. Can we please, before we do that, thank our speakers very, very much for some fantastic contributions.